Greetings, human beings.
Hello, once again.
Here we are.
Thank you for joining us.
Yep, more fun.
More fun and frolics.
Yes.
Wow, we've got a special episode today. I got to interview Caitlin Durante, who you may know from the Bechdel Cast, which is one of my favourite podcasts. It's all about the representation of women in film.
Yeah, great interview. I've had a little listen through the edit and some real nice chunks of knowledge and insight.
Yeah, so Caitlin also teaches screenwriting classes, and that's what we're going to be talking about today is that process of screenwriting. And speaking of courses, I heard that you had a course going.
Did you? Did you hear that?
Heard that somewhere.
Yeah, I just launched my new business, Zen and the Art of Composing, which I'm mega excited about. It's basically just involves all of the things that I'm really, really passionate about in one package. And it's a course that I'm going to be running in a couple of months' time from now. So it is a combination of different disciplines, Zen meditation, and my composition, arrangement, and production. And essentially, it's a number of simple exercises that I have created to enhance creativity, enhance flow, and to give people the resources that they need to take their creative selves to the next level.
Very exciting and sounds really inspiring, and yeah, I think we could all use something like that to just help us motivate, to create and incorporate those practices into our routine. And I think having someone there to kind of hold you accountable to the creative goals that you set for yourself is really important.
It's great to have a work group. I've had a couple of them myself, and they have been very impactful to my life, because you've got other people that are doing the same thing. It's hard in the creative industries. There's so much rejection. It's very, very tough discipline.
Lonely.
It's lonely. And you can just feel like things aren't moving, and to have that sort of mirror and feedback from other people can really sort of enhance your experience and boost morale.
Yeah, and really, benefiting from someone else who's done it already and has all those years of experience and have been through the same kind of blocks that you're trying to get through is just, it will just save you so much time and energy and suffering, I think.
Yeah, and it applies to life as well. That's the way that I see my art and my music, is it's really just a lens to see the world through. So techniques to de-stress and to open myself up for my work, that's also my life as well, right?
Yeah, I'm sure you're going to learn so much from it as well. I think teaching other people what you do is a great way to grow and learn yourself. So everyone's going to benefit from that group.
Exactly. I already am, just from beginning to start conversations with people and to start to understand what it is that they are looking for. It just gives me more insight and understanding about myself and about the things that are valuable to others. That type of feedback loop is just so incredible for an artist. It will go straight back into my work in numerous ways that I can't even fathom at this point.
Wow. Well, I can't wait to hear all about it.
Yeah, check it out, Zen and the Art of Composing. I've put some pages up online, and if anyone's interested, I am running free one-to-one consultations. So if you did want to just find out more information about it, or if you wanted to talk to me on a Zoom call about it, just get in touch.
Yeah, and there's also some great videos that you've made of example exercises
Thank you.
there on YouTube.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel like I've pushed through some uncomfortable states to create those videos. We did a video shoot as a promo video, and it was so hard for me. I just had some self-sabotage stuff going on, and just had my head in my hands. We did about 50 takes, and it was like climbing a mountain. But then after that day, the week after that, I went and just recorded some off-the-cuff videos with some of the techniques, 5-day challenge, meditation one, and it was so easy and fun and flowy. So
well, that's what it's all about, isn't it? Breaking through those uncomfortable places to get to the gold on the other side.
Right. That's what the course is going to be promoting and going to be helping people with.
Great. Well, let's get on with the interview, shall we?
Yes, indeed. So our guest today, Caitlin Durante, is a writer, comedian, and co-host of the hugely successful Bechdel Cast, a podcast about the representation of women in film. As a stand-up, she has performed all over America, as well as the Edinburgh Fringe Festival. She teaches screenwriting workshops from her home in LA, drawing on her knowledge as a story analyst and script expert. We're very grateful to have Caitlin on the show to share some of her wisdom with us.
I've always loved movies. It's been my favorite hobby since I was a kid, to the point where I was like, well, maybe I should just go to school so many times and get multiple degrees in film. Really, really put all my eggs in one basket here, career-wise. So, I got an undergrad degree in film and then a graduate degree in screenwriting, famously from Boston University. I hate to mention it, but but then I kind of didn't really do much with that for a few years after that. But I did start doing stand-up comedy but continued to watch movies and appreciate film. And shortly after college, I also started doing different internships, mostly reading scripts for production companies and some like screenwriting competitions. And I would write notes, and then they'd like figure out if they wanted to pursue that script any further. Pretty common thing for like basically they just like hire development interns and they're like, go through this slog of submissions and tell us if any of them are good. And maybe they get paid these days, but they certainly didn't when I was doing it. So I did like years and years of unpaid script reading. I was doing stand-up comedy this whole time and figured, that's just kind of that'll be my creative pursuit for a while, because I wasn't really writing scripts since then. And then I was like, you know what? No, I love movies. I want to be writing movies. So then I was like, let me get this master's degree in film, which was successful at motivating me to write while I was in school. And then I still struggle with motivation and accountability as far as writing goes, since I finished that program. But, we're all on our own journey and doing things at our own pace. That's what I keep telling myself. So, I finished that program, my master's, was still doing comedy, had gotten a few jobs where I was actually like reading scripts and getting paid for it. And at some point I was like, oh, I should take all this like background and knowledge and experience I have and start doing something with it. So I started teaching screenwriting classes. I basically compiled my own curriculum and designed my own class, and started doing that a few years ago. And first like in person, and then I transitioned to like online classes even before the pandemic started. So it was a very easy, in fact, no transition at all when the pandemic hit, because I was already set up to be teaching online classes. So that was very convenient. And then kept doing comedy and kept writing as much as I could, and, developed different projects that I still need to be doing more with, but ain't that the thing? But yeah, that's the general background.
I suppose like having a career now as a creative person and building a brand, it involves so many different kind of branches of learning and doing. It's more rare now, isn't it, to have like a set career path that's just one step after another that's kind of predetermined.
Right, especially for creative careers. Although that might be true for, non-creative type work too. But it feels you do have to kind of have your toes dipped in a bunch of different little puddles. Because of course I started doing the Bechdel Cast podcast 5 years ago because I was like, well, I'm a comedian in Los Angeles. That's the next logical step because it's against the law to be a comedian without a podcast. So I started doing that with Jamie Loftus, and obviously that's a film podcast, and it's also, comedic in tone. So I'm, bringing in a lot of my other things into that. And I just have a lot of little things, and they're all related, luckily. So it's not hard to kind of jump from one thing to the next.
Yeah, and it kind of all comes together in the end, doesn't it? It sounds like you had just the perfect blend of experience and knowledge to get you where you are now.
To the point where I've cultivated my life in such a way that my job is to watch and talk about movies. And that's really all I do. And I get paid for it. So that's pretty nice.
You've made it.
I made it.
Yeah, I had a similar thing because I studied film and journalism because I kind of knew that I loved film. I wanted to write about film, but it never really goes how you think it's going to go. It's unique kind of path. Right. So I was wondering, with regards to writing screenplays, I know that on the Bechdel Cast you talk a lot about the Bechdel lens and like approaching watching movies with that lens. So do you have that lens in place with writing as well, and do you kind of teach how to put that lens on to your students?
I do, yeah. I didn't always use that lens per se in my earlier days as a youth, but I did always have an interest in portraying certain characters in a way that most movies don't, which is probably why I was inspired to, start doing the Bechdel Cast. But it wasn't until I started doing the podcast that I was like, oh, I really need to go back and examine some of my own writing, and I don't think I'd be happy with myself to read some stuff I wrote in like 2013. But I did, like, for example, I wrote an action comedy about like a pizza delivery guy who gets framed by the mob and has to and hijinks ensue. But I wrote that character as a very like kind and gentle man who like suffers from severe anxiety, and which is not the character that you generally see as the star of like an action movie, especially if it is a male protagonist. And then I wrote or developed a couple other features that were, like female driven, and realized, oh, like, wow, there aren't many movies that star women as the like protagonist who is driving the narrative. So I was like, I want to make sure I'm doing that in my own writing. And then obviously, since starting the Bechdel Cast, I was like, oh, this is basically all I want to write now. And then, in my classes too, I have a whole section on the like character development chunk of my curriculum, to just instruction on how to be mindful about representation, how to be mindful about developing your characters, making sure that you're doing things respectfully and responsibly. And I make sure that that's instruction that my students get.
Yeah, I think it's important to kind of examine your own unconscious bias, and looking at old work is a great way to do that. I've had a similar experience.
Yeah.
So what is kind of the main thing that you teach then with regards to writing about a character that's from a different cultural background to you, and doing it respectfully?
Yeah, I mean, it's a few different there are a few different like approaches I think that people can take depending on what the story is and what the events of the story are. On one hand, it's kind of your responsibility to do adequate research, and you can, base your character off an existing person, someone you know well, someone that you're friends with. If it's, depending on what the story is, if you need to do a lot of research about a particular culture, that's obviously an important thing to do. You can ask people from the backgrounds and like kind of the cultural backgrounds that you're writing characters that share those backgrounds. You can basically have people give you notes on how you've represented those characters / that culture, and you want to make sure you pay those people for their time and effort and perspective. And then it's also a matter of like knowing your limits, where it's probably, I use the movie Tangerine as an example, a movie about Black trans sex workers that was made by a cis white man who doesn't have any sex work experience to my knowledge. The movie is still enjoyable and I like it, and he did a good enough job that it's like not like horrible representation. But I'm also just like, were you the right person to make this movie, sir? Probably not. So it's a matter of like knowing your limits and knowing like, am I the right person to tell this story or to tell this person's story? And if you're not, like, don't attempt something that you really can't speak to or don't have enough knowledge or experience or perspective on, and stick with what you know. Obviously, that's the famous writing advice: write what you know. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't also make an effort to be inclusive, obviously. And then there's another approach where you write a character or all of your characters as if they look exactly like you and have the exact same background as you, basically, so that you're not bringing any unconscious bias into any particular character. And then you go back and like write in your character description of those characters, identifying them as, whatever specific ethnicity or, if they are non-binary, if they are from a different country, things like that. So you're basically developing them with the care that you would give someone who resembled you, but not bringing any of those biases into that character. But you also need to be careful with that, because sometimes you'll see that done and it's clear that a character, like a certain actor was cast, and then depending on what happens in the movie or in the story, something will happen, and then it's like, this character being of like a certain race, for example, that's probably not how they would react in that situation. Here's an example, like if your characters like get pulled over by a racist cop, obviously that's going to be a very different experience for a white person than a black person. So you want to make sure that with your kind of like quote unquote colorblind character development, you're still the events of your story are still like lining up with what would happen in real life, or like those representations still track based on the different backgrounds of your characters. So it's definitely tricky. And I don't know if any of what I just said made any sense, but it's a lot of just like being hyper aware of what you're doing. And if you have if you have a certain perspective and you know that you have kind of like blind spots there, you want to make sure that like those are being filled in by people who do have that perspective, and just like covering your bases. The end of that enormous monologue.
That's great advice. I mean, I guess a lot of it comes into the editing process, doesn't it? Because you kind of want to write that first draft just in the flow, and then make those adjustments as you edit and as you get other people to read it, and get perspectives from other people.
And then even like, let's say you're lucky enough to like you've written several drafts, you've sold your script, and it's going into production and it's being cast. Even after the movie's been cast, you want to go back and make sure, and this is depending on how the deal went down. This might be your job as a writer, it might be someone else's job, but you like people in Hollywood or in the industry in general need to make sure that they are going back through the script and saying, okay, this actor was cast to play this character. Do things still track based on like, again, the events of the story, the dialogue that character is delivering, things like that. So it's like a constant process of like making sure things still scan even into the like production process.
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm pretty sure the second method you talked about is what happened with Alien. I think it was an all male cast, and then Ripley was turned into a woman.
Right. Yes.
So I guess that's an example of that being kind of successful.
Right, exactly, because you don't watch that, because that's a movie from the late 70s, and no, like it was kind of unheard of for a woman to be cast in as the lead of like a sci-fi movie, although it's arguably also a horror movie, and that's not uncommon for like a woman to be the lead of that, because she has to be the final girl, right? So although that trope wasn't really much of a thing at that point, in fact it was maybe one of the first movies to sort of do that, because that was also right when like Halloween was coming out, and then a couple years later other slasher movies followed suit, and that's really where that like final girl trope was born. So what was I even saying? Right. So Alien, it's a great example of a movie where you just basically write characters and make sure each of them is solidly developed. And then in the casting process, you can make choices that wherein you're not only casting like cishet white men. Sometimes you cast cishet white women.
Revolutionary.
Right. But yeah, and it works, and Ripley feels like a character with like full development and like, you know, just a multi-dimensional character because she was originally developed as a male character. So it's kind of sad that that's how that has to be, or that's how it was several decades ago. But it did work in the movie's favor.
Yeah, I guess that brings me to the next question quite well, which is why is it that male screenwriters so often approach writing women as if they're another species?
I have a few theories. Some men are just raging misogynists who, you know, see women a certain way and as like objects of sexual desire, or as, you know, weak, fragile people who need to be saved, or as people who are not particularly smart or capable. And that's just how they write women to reflect those prejudices and biases. Other writers aren't, you know, raging misogynists, but what tends to happen is that basically like tropes beget more tropes, where if a screenwriter is like, you know, analyzing other movies and trying to figure out, okay, this is how you write a movie, and this is how women are written in movies, well, that just must be how you write women. This is how you write a screenplay. So they're seeing other tropes, they're incorporating them into their own movies, and it just becomes this sort of like endless cycle of terrible representation. And that spans, you know, not just across gender, but also race and sexuality and ability and class and things like that. So that's where you get all these like really harmful tropes that have been perpetuated over the years. So yeah, those are my two main theories, where it's either just like misogynist men writing women, and then other people who are maybe not so actively misogynist, but they are like, you know, studying movies written by misogynists and then just kind of not knowing any better besides to perpetuate those tropes. So that's my guess.
So is there a standard kind of structure or formula that you teach for screenplays in your classes?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I teach 3-act structure, which, if anyone's not familiar, is really just a fancy way of saying a story has a beginning, middle, and end. But there are also basic plot points that generally need to happen in certain spots within each act so that you are telling a cohesive and cinematic story. And each plot point generally serves a specific function within the larger narrative. So boiled down very simply, yes, it's just like Act 1 is the beginning, Act 2 is the middle, Act 3 is the end, but I make sure to talk about like the you know, things that generally need to happen within each act and the functions they serve in the larger story and things like that. And then in my more advanced levels of my class, because I teach 4 levels of screenwriting classes. The first one is just an introductory class where I lecture a lot and everyone learns the basics, and then you write a treatment for an original feature film that each student conceives of and develops and writes the treatment for. And then the next 3 levels of my class are their students developing, writing, and workshopping their feature-length screenplay 1 act at a time. So the level 2 class, you're writing act 1. The level 3 class, you're writing act 2. The level 4 class, you're writing act 3. I really wish I could figure out a way to make it so that like level 1 equals act 1. Level 2 equals act 2, because it's confusing. I'm like, oh yeah, you're in my level 3 class, so you're writing act 2. Anyway, so in my more advanced levels, I teach something called 8 sequence structure, which is not different from 3-act structure. It's basically just what 3-act structure looks like under a magnifying glass. So I dive into that sort of structural approach to writing a feature-length screenplay. And that's kind of just the basic story structure I teach. And then I also obviously go into many other aspects of developing a story, such as characterization, world building, theme, tone. I talk about things like different like storytelling devices and mechanics, and plant and payoff, and flashbacks, and montages, and twists, and MacGuffins, and all those kinds of fun things. I also teach screenwriting format, which is the format you use to actually like write a screenplay, in terms of like formatting, like where the dialogue goes on the page, and how to actually like write a page of a screenplay kind of thing. So I cover all of those things in my classes.
Yeah, it's kind of like building a machine, isn't it? A big, huge machine with lots of moving parts.
Truly, so many moving parts. And I always tell my students, like, yeah, it's hard. It's so hard. Like, this is not easy. There are so many things to be managing when you're writing a story. There's so much to keep track of. It's no small or easy feat to develop and write a feature screenplay. So anyone who's doing it, give yourself a pat on the back.
Well done, you.
Yes.
So would you say that a good screenplay starts from really good characters, or is it more about the idea and the structure?
There are different schools of thought on this, and it really depends on what type of story you're writing. Obviously, both things are very important. A more plot-driven story, which is what I tend to write. I love a good like hero's journey with like a very specific and tangible and external goal that the characters are after, and kind of the journey that they go on along the way. That's the type of story that I lean toward in my own writing, and it tends to be slightly easier to teach, especially if you're like teaching 3-act structure. So those are like the types of movies that I use as examples in my classes. And that's what like probably like, I don't know, 80 to 90% of especially like mainstream movies tend to be. I'm kind of pulling that number out of nowhere, but I feel like that's a pretty good estimate. And then there are also very compelling character-driven stories where there's no like specific goal that the characters are on per se. The story more derives from the arc that a character has, or some like internal struggle that they are dealing with. And obviously for those, you really want to spend a lot of time developing your characters and making sure that they're compelling and motivated, and that they have many dimensions to their character. But you also want to apply that same amount of character development to a more plot-driven story, because if you have a great idea, it's hard to execute if your characters are very like stock, one-dimensional, poorly developed. So both things are very important. For me specifically, though, I usually come up with an idea first, like a premise, and then I figure out, okay, what characters would best serve this story, and then sort of develop them accordingly.
Yeah, it kind of all branches out, doesn't it, from that central idea.
Yeah.
So what are some of the most common mistakes that your new screenwriters make, or just, in movies that get made?
Sure. I mean, yeah, I've from all of the scripts I've read when I was like a story analyst, which is again something I was doing like as an unpaid internship for the longest time. And these days I have I do that now for like individual writers. So when you're like a development person or like a script reader, you write notes, but those notes are seen by the production company or the screenplay competition judges, but usually not by the writers themselves. So I was like, oh, I should start writing notes that are actually for the writers so they can figure out how to make improvements, or they can know what's already working with their with their story. So within the past few years, I started writing like notes for writers. So if anyone wants my script notes, hit me up. but this is all to say that for all of the scripts I've read in different capacities, I've read a lot of ones that were not very well written. And of course that's subjective, but like, there are certain things where it's like, oh, I can tell this was done effectively or not. And the things that I came upon most frequently, I would say, are writers not really understanding structure, and specifically not really understanding the function of the different like structural pieces of a story, that they like need to make sure there's a good amount of exposition before the story is set in motion so that you can be connected to the characters and care about them before their world is turned upside down. Things like that. I see a lot of just underdeveloped characters in general, people not putting enough time or care into character development. Something I see a lot is like not enough tension being like built up and sustained throughout a story. And this comes from different things like characters will overcome obstacles too easily, or something will happen, or like a change will occur, or a turning point will happen in a story that doesn't feel earned. So that usually lends itself to kind of a failure to build up tension, which is something that like you really, really need in a story. I see different things like, plot points or characters or exchanges of dialogues that aren't serving a specific function in the narrative and could just be like removed, or if there are like two characters who are serving the same function, they can be folded into each other. But a lot of writers will just like have kind of too many characters, or just like, again, things that aren't really serving much of a function. So it's either like get rid of those things or find a function for those things. I'll see pacing that's too fast or too lagging. I'll see like inconsistent tone, I'll see theme that's not super clear, kind of muddled, things like that. But it's also all like, I understand that like people do these things as writers, because it's like, again, writing is so hard, and crafting a complex feature film is so hard that like you're bound to get some of this stuff not quite right, especially on your first draft. Like first drafts are always like a mess. So it's just a matter of rewriting and getting notes from people who will give you constructive feedback, and just keep chipping away at it.
Yeah, and keep editing, I guess. Just
Oh yeah,
keep at it. I think is important. So you mentioned that there were a couple of screenplays that you kind of study or use as examples in your courses. So what are those?
So Paddington 2, and I'm not even joking. It's a terrific movie. It's a terrific screenplay, and I use it because it employs so many things that you might need, that you would like come across as a screenwriter, learning different, like, again, storytelling devices and mechanics and stuff like that, because there's so much plant and payoff. There's use of voiceover. There's use of flashbacks. There's use of dream sequences. There's just multiple storylines that need to intersect at some point. There are a number of characters that you have to like manage and develop, and there's a just perfect 3 act structure. Just like everything about it is flawless. I would say the same applies to Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. That's a script I teach from a lot. There's also just like great dialogue in these scripts. Another one I teach from a lot is Get Out. I use Thelma and Louise as an example a lot. That's a movie that is like just a perfect example of heightening in a movie and like building that tension more and more, and things heightening and stakes heightening as the story goes on. Shaun of the Dead is a great example of a script that uses foreshadowing, uses plant and payoff, uses motif, uses a bunch of other cool little like screenwriting tricks. Little Miss Sunshine I teach a lot from. Those are kind of the main ones. Legally Blonde, a few others here and there, but those are ones I kind of go to, especially because I want to. So many screenwriting classes that I've taken, or just like textbooks that I've read for, film classes, are referring to movies from decades and decades and decades ago. And I'm like, okay, that's great and everything, and it's important to like know about those movies and stuff. But I'm not writing a movie from 1945. I'm writing a movie from 2022. So I need to know what like how scripts are being written in the modern era. So I try to use like just movies that are from the past decade, or some are again, like Thelma and Louise is from the early 90s, Shaun of the Dead is from the mid 2000s, but as much as I can, I'm using examples from movies that are pretty current, because that's just like the movies that are marketable right now. And the better you understand like the types of stories that are marketable, and just kind of like the modern way of telling stories, the better chance of success.
Yes. That your course motto.
Yes.
Yeah. So do you think what's marketable has changed in recent years?
I do, and I am seeing trends towards like kind of more inclusive storytelling, and filmmakers from marginalized backgrounds being given more opportunities, and having more chances to tell their stories, and that becoming, and we're not all the way there, like things aren't perfect yet, and there may not even be good, but they're getting better, and that's encouraging, even if that's only happening because like the studio executives who are in charge are like, oh, well, I guess there is an untapped market here and we can make money from inclusive stories, rather than like the motive just being like, oh, it's important, like representation and inclusivity is just important, so we should just be telling those stories. There's still a lot of like capitalist motivations behind a lot of this, but the good news is that we are gearing more toward stories that have like meaningful inclusion and representation. So we are seeing those trends, and that is very encouraging to me.
Yeah, I really hope it continues. I hope it's not just a passing phase.
I hope not. And we are chipping away at it to continue to use this metaphor, but I think it's just we gotta stay strong. We gotta keep trucking along.
Yeah, keep doing the work.
Yeah.
and teaching these new lessons to the next screenwriters.
Yeah, everyone take my class.
So I noticed in the movies that you listed there was no Titanic. That just
Oh, that's because Titanic is a terrible screenplay, and I like and I love the movie obviously, but like the dialogue is not very good. The James Cameron style of writing is he like overwrites every scene he writes. So one of the things about screenwriting is that you want to write with efficiency and economy. So if you're writing a novel, for example, you can take a lot of liberties with like getting very flowery with your descriptions and, just kind of having, your language can be very verbose and things like that. With a screenplay, you only have so much like time to get your story told. So you want to make sure that also because you're the writer, but there are a bunch of other people who will be making your movie, hopefully, who will do a lot of the work in terms of like communicating things visually. So you don't have to spend pages and pages like describing a character's costume, for example. You just say like they're wearing a dress that's blah blah blah, like 3 or 4 descriptors, and only if that's important to the narrative. If we don't really, unless like the dress comes back and like it pays off in some way, you don't really need to spend much time describing most things, because there are like costume designers and production designers and set designers for those things. So as a screenwriter, your job is to just as economically and efficiently as you can tell your story. And I forget why I even started talking about this.
Because of Titanic?
Right, yes, because of Titanic. Thank you so much. So James Cameron spends every scene he writes just like saying too much and like not efficiently writing his scenes, to the point where my podcast co-host and I did a live reading of the Titanic screenplay for like a fundraiser thing. And the screenplay, like the movie, is too long. And I trimmed it down. I basically rewrote the screenplay, trimmed out like 80 pages or something like that, and it was still too long. But I basically just took like so much filler that James Cameron had written into the script and just like, I was like, this doesn't need to be there. We don't need this. And I just like wrote a much slimmer version of the screenplay for Titanic. And yes, so that is why I don't teach Titanic in my classes, because it is actually not a good example of a well-written screenplay.
So why is it so enjoyable to watch then? Is it just a case of so bad that it's good?
I mean, and this isn't to say that like the screenplay is bad. It's just, he makes just a lot of like stylistic choices that I wouldn't make as a writer. Because like when you read the screenplay, you're like, oh, this is basically the movie. He just does it in way too many words.
So is it over described as well, like his stage directions and that stuff?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I've watched his masterclass. I don't know if you've ever watched that.
I haven't. No, what's it like?
It's good. I mean, he strikes me as a very obsessive guy. So maybe he just gets so deep into the details of things that he just wants to describe it all in so much detail.
Well, he does this thing. So in my quest to find different like treatments and outlines that are like accessible online for my students to read, so that they can know like, oh, this is what a well-written treatment looks like. This is what an effective outline looks like. They're pretty hard to find, but what I have found a lot of are, I think they're called scriptments, and James Cameron seems to be the only person who does this, where he basically writes a treatment that is it's like a hybrid between a screenplay and a treatment. So the idea behind a treatment is that there's no like set length for them, but they're generally somewhere maybe between like 5 to 20 pages, and it's just a detailed synopsis of your story. He does that, but then he also basically writes half of the screenplay into his treatment. So you'll find these like scriptments of his that are like 80 to 100 pages long, and it's like, well, you might as well have just written the screenplay, because that's about how long a screenplay is. So I don't know what he's doing, but he's very enthusiastic, I think, when it comes to developing his stories.
He just gets so immersed in the world and the characters that he just lives in that world.
That's a good thing to be as a writer.
But you also want to be concise, and
Right.
it's the balance.
Exactly.
So, I mean, are there screenwriters either working now or from your experience that have really inspired you to pursue what you pursue?
I'm sure there are. I hate to admit this, but there's so many movies that I love that I'm like, I don't know who wrote the screenplay for that. So I can answer your question as far as like movies that have been like, oh, I want to write something like this someday. And those are a few that I've already mentioned as like kind of my go-to examples that I teach in my classes. Also, a movie like Back to the Future, which is it's got some problematic elements. There's no denying that, but it's also a great screenplay and a fun romp, and never let it go.
And that's one that I can't let go either. I know it's problematic, but I just love it so much.
It's fun. So as far as it just being like a fun time travel comedy, like I would love to write something like that. I would love to write something like Jurassic Park. Although I don't want to, I mean, Michael Crichton is scary, or was. He died, right? I don't remember.
I think so, yeah.
So I don't want to really emulate him in any way, but
why is he scary? I don't really know anything about him.
Oh, I forget what it was. He at some point like got really anti-science in his life, which is weird because he was writing mostly sci-fi stuff, but don't quote me on this. I have a horrible memory, but he kind of like went off the rails in like a scary way, but I don't remember a lot of specifics. It's so hard. There's so many bad people out there. It's really hard to keep track. I was like, every time I'm like, oh, I like this actor. Wait, do I? Or did they get Me Too'd? Or like, are they actually horrible? Like, I never,
Yeah. Do they have a controversy section on their Wikipedia page?
Exactly. Yes.
So it's a constant struggle of keeping straight like who I like and who I now have to hate.
Yeah, it's hard as well, isn't it, when you love these movies and then you find out things that you know.
Yeah, and that's like so much of the podcast. I'm like, crap. Can I still like The Fifth Element? Can I still like Indiana Jones? Things like that.
Struggle.
The struggle it's there. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of. Generally, I just want to write comedic romps with a good like moral center, or like something meaningful to say, some like commentary provided, or just like, even if it's just like, hey, women can also do things. See?
That's the message. That's the theme.
Right.
Yeah, comedy is a great way to address all kinds of issues. And I don't think there's enough of that really now in cinema, enough like fun comedic romps that also have something to say.
I agree. I quite liked Don't Look Up, which I feel like is a good example of like a very recent, tonally comedic story, like satire about open to interpretation. You could very easily map the COVID-19 pandemic onto the movie. I think it was probably originally written as a climate change / global warming allegory, but it uses humor and there's a lot of social commentary, and it was pretty fun.
So does your background in stand-up comedy kind of help factor into your screenwriting process?
Definitely. Definitely. Yeah. I've tried to write non-comedy drama, I guess. And I just can't do it. I'm no good at it, and everything ends up having a comedic tone with what I write.
You need the balance between the two, don't you? Otherwise, you're just taking yourself too seriously. And that's a fear in my own writing, is that I'm just taking myself way too seriously and need to lighten up.
We could all stand to lighten up, you know?
Okay, well, I don't want to keep you too long, but I guess we'll just end on something I ask all of the guests, which is, what's the one thing or the one piece of advice that you would want to impart to someone just starting out? I guess, you've worked in lots of different areas, so that could be in screenwriting or in comedy or in podcasting even. What's the one thing? Is there one size fits all piece of advice, or
something that applies to all of those things is just consume. If you're, trying to write screenplays, or if you're trying to get into stand-up comedy or wanting to start a podcast, put in the work as far as like consuming a lot of different types of those things. So if you want to, I'll use like screenwriting as an example. Read a bunch of screenplays. Take a class in screenwriting. It's not something it's not impossible to teach it to yourself, but it'll probably speed up the process of learning to actually like take a class and get some instruction. Practice applies to all these things. The more you write, the better you'll get at it. Also, especially for like screenwriting, it can be a very daunting thing to just like be like, oh, I have to write a 90 to 120 page screenplay. That sounds impossible. So just like start small. Start on a small scale. Maybe start with a short film that you write, a 5-page short film, or just like practice writing short scenes, or just like little exchanges of dialogue, and then just kind of keep working your way up and building and developing out a story. So don't, because I do this too. I'm just like, oh, I need to start writing an enormously intricate story right now. And again, that's daunting. So ease yourself into it, little by little, and just go easy on yourself. That's my final bit of advice. Just be kind. Be kind to yourself and others.
Oh, that's nice. Well, that's a nice place to end.
Great, insightful interview. Well done.
Yes, and sorry to James Cameron if we offended you.
Caramel.
Jam Cam.
We do enjoy his work, don't we?
We do.
We're just watching his masterclass for the second time at the moment, which is great.
It is great.
It is so good.
He's an interesting guy, for sure.
Yeah. What a guy, man! Like Terminator, it's just amazing. Aliens. Wow.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun, and thank you again to Caitlin. There are links in the description if you want to follow her work, and yeah, make sure to listen to the Bechdel Cast because it's awesome and hilarious and fun.
Yeah, it's a great show and an important one as well. Right?
Very important.
Yeah,
it goes pretty deep. They're on Patreon as well, as are we.
Nice lead in.
Thanks. you can support us on there, and we'll be putting out some new episodes where we're going to just share some of our work and talk about how we created it in a bit more kind of detail. So if you're as interested in the creative process as we are, then it's the place to be.
Yeah, we're having a lot of fun creating content, and we thought this would be a good way to go. I'm going to be featuring one of my tracks, and then we're going to play the track, and then I'm going to talk about how I created it and what my process was and how I came to the story, and just all the juicy details. And then Jade, you're going to be reading something you've written, and
some short fiction, and then just kind of going into where the idea came from and then how I executed it. So yeah, hopefully some useful stuff in there that you can take away.
Exactly. And we're really up from hearing from you, so we're really open to your suggestions on Patreon. So you've got a suggestion for an episode, or you would like to know more about a subject, then you can communicate directly to us on the platform, and then we will make a mini episode based around the subject that you have chosen.
Can be on anything you like, as serious or as silly as you see fit. We will do it.
yeah. It's a great way to communicate with you guys and with you friends, guys again. It's just a loop like that we can feed back to each other and
a community.
Yeah.
So come and join us.
Indeed.
And thank you for listening again.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you. We really appreciate you taking the time and being here. It makes this whole thing happen. So
yeah, sending love.
Yes, namaste.